Could Canada be about to start breaking apart? For decades, international attention has been focused on the French-speaking province of Quebec, which has long had a strong pro-independence movement. However, following the country's recent general election, many are now looking towards the Western Canadian province of Alberta, where separatist sentiment has also grown, including in a rather unusual way. So, what exactly lies behind all this, and could Canada really start to break apart? Hello and welcome. If you're new to the channel, my name is James Ker-Lindsay, and here I take an informed look at international relations, conflict, security and statehood. We tend to think that separatism is driven by ethnic, linguistic or religious differences. A community with a distinct identity that sees itself as fundamentally different from the majority seeks to break away to form an independent state. However, sometimes a secessionist movement can also be driven by economic and political factors. One of the best examples is in Canada. For many decades, discussions have centred on whether Quebec, the predominantly French-speaking province, would break away and form a separate country. But while this debate continues, a strong secessionist movement has also emerged over in the west of the country, especially in the province of Alberta. At 10 million square kilometres or 3.8 million square miles, Canada is the world's second largest country by area. Its population is around 40 million. Operating under a federal political system, the country is divided into 10 provinces and 3 territories. Located in Western Canada, Alberta is the 4th largest province by both size and population, with approximately 5 million inhabitants. With an economy dominated by oil and gas exploration, Alberta is the 3rd largest provincial economy after Ontario and Quebec, and accounts for between 15 and 20% of Canada's overall GDP. While Canada has a long and rich history of human settlement stretching back thousands of years, our story begins in the late 15th century with the arrival of European explorers. Over the following centuries, Britain and France established extensive colonies in North America. This lasted until the end of the 7 Years' War in 1763, when the French territories east of the Mississippi River came under British control. In 1791, following the emergence of the United States of America, much of the remaining British-held territory in North America was divided into 2 parts: the predominantly French-speaking Lower Canada, known as Quebec, and the English-speaking Upper Canada. However, after a Francophone rebellion, the 2 territories were merged in 1840 to form a single unit, the Province of Canada. This lasted until 1867, when Canada, which included present-day Ontario and Quebec, united with 2 other British colonies, Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, to form a confederation known as the Dominion of Canada. From that point, the country expanded rapidly. 3 years later, in 1870, it acquired Prince Rupert's Land, Manitoba and the Northwest Territories. This was followed by the addition of the colony of British Columbia in 1871, Prince Edward Island in 1873 and the Arctic Islands in 1880. Meanwhile, the completion of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1885 opened up the settlement of the prairies in the west of the country. As a result, Alberta and Saskatchewan became provinces in 1905. Then, in 1949, Canada assumed its current external borders when Newfoundland, which included the territory of Labrador, joined the Federation. Finally, the creation of Nunavut in 1999 established the country's present internal boundaries. Although Canada had spent a century expanding, by the 1970s pressures were emerging. These were centred on Quebec, where a resurgence of Francophone identity coincided with calls for modernisation. Although the provincial authorities began pushing for greater self-rule and the central government tried to strengthen Canadian national unity by making French an official language, calls for independence now grew. All this gained wider attention in 1976 when the pro-independence Parti Québécois won elections in the territory. As a result, 4 years later, in 1980, it organised a referendum on a sovereignty association model that would see Quebec formally separate from Canada while retaining close economic ties. However, while the idea was defeated with a 60% vote against it, the push for statehood continued. After returning to power in 1994, the Parti Québécois held another referendum the following year. This time, the plan for independence was only narrowly defeated, losing by just 50.6% to 49.4%. The 1995 referendum was a watershed moment for Canada and prompted crucial legal and political developments. Following a request from the Canadian government, the Canadian Supreme Court ruled in 1998 that while Quebec couldn't unilaterally secede under either Canadian or international law, a clear vote in favour of secession would require all parties to negotiate in good faith. This in turn led to the passing of a new law, the Clarity Act, in 2000. This established the terms for any future independence process. In addition to requiring that any referendum must pose a clear question, it also mandated that all provinces and Indigenous peoples be involved in any subsequent negotiations. It also stipulated that a formal constitutional amendment would be necessary for any secession. Although Quebec refused to accept the law, the Clarity Act has nevertheless come to be viewed as providing a framework for any future secession. But since then, the situation has evolved considerably. While the campaign for Quebec independence still has a solid base, broader support in the province has declined. Indeed, latest polling suggests that around 30 to 40% support breaking away and establishing a separate independent state. However, this certainly doesn't mean that separatism has disappeared in Canada. Instead, attention has increasingly turned to another very different secessionist movement, this time in the Western Canadian province of Alberta. Although the independence movement in Alberta isn't as well known as the one in Quebec, it also has a long history and deep roots. Almost as soon as it joined the Federation in 1905, Alberta felt politically marginalised and economically exploited. Most notably, unlike the older federal provinces, it wasn't given control over its own resources until 1930. However, the crucial turning point came in the 1980s when the Canadian government under Prime Minister Trudeau introduced a nationwide energy policy, the National Energy Programme, the NEP. For many in the oil and gas-rich West, this was seen as a power grab by the federal government, especially as many argued it redistributed income from the energy-rich states to the other parts of the country. All this had a significant impact in Alberta, where latent suspicion of the federal government was combined with a strongly conservative political streak. As a result, an openly separatist political party now emerged, the Western Canada concept. However, while this gained some initial traction, even winning a seat in the Provincial Assembly, by the late 1980s, the movement had died down as debate increasingly turned to greater autonomy within Canada. Meanwhile, under Stephen Harper, an Albertan who served as the Conservative Prime Minister of Canada from 2006 to 2015, separatist sentiment in Alberta largely receded from public view. I hope you're finding this interesting. If so, please do give it a like and perhaps subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It all really helps. Thanks so much, and now back to the video. But while independence had been pushed off the political agenda, it certainly hadn't disappeared. Over the past decade, it's made a remarkable resurgence. This has been driven by two interrelated factors. First of all, a decade of Liberal Party rule under Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the son of Pierre Trudeau, created an increasing sense of political marginalisation. Notably, despite winning the 2015, 2019 and 2021 national elections, the Liberals saw their share of the vote fall to just under 14% in Alberta. Secondly, many Albertans saw the Liberal Party's policies as fundamentally opposed to the province's economic interests, especially regarding the energy sector. Additionally, a federal revenue sharing arrangement, the so-called equalisation formula, is also widely resented in Alberta, where many believe that the province contributes disproportionately to federal revenues, despite its own economic problems. All this led to a growing sense that the existing federal arrangements were working against Alberta and in turn fed separatist sentiment. Indeed, opinion polls in 2020 and 2021 indicated that as many as 40% of Albertans would vote for independence if given the option. This trend spurred movements like Western Exit, Wexit, and the Maverick Party, which called not only for Alberta to break away, but also for Western Canada more broadly, including neighbouring Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and British Columbia. Meanwhile, and even more interestingly, in a province that shares many political, ideological and cultural similarities with the neighbouring US states of Montana and Idaho, polling also suggested that as many as 20% of Albertans favoured leaving Canada to become the 51st US state. Capitalising on all this, the Alberta provincial government began calling for greater autonomy, launching several high-profile initiatives such as the 2021 Fair Deal Panel and the 2022 Alberta Sovereignty Within a United Canada Act. However, while support for independence appeared to decline slightly in 2023 and early 2024, it's now rising again, and this time there's a sense that it may well lead to a referendum. So, what's driven this resurgence? Ultimately, it's down to two broad developments. The first was the re-election of Donald Trump as US President in November 2024. Aside from the political affinity that many Albertans feel with US Conservatives, Alberta's heavy economic reliance on oil and gas mean that Trump's support for fossil fuels has been widely welcomed in the province. Meanwhile, although Trump's policies towards Canada as a whole, including tariffs and threats of annexation, have angered most of the rest of the country, the response from Alberta has been far more muted. For instance, its Premier, Danielle Smith, who's been accused of flirting with the pro-independence movement, refused to endorse a joint federal-provincial response to the US import taxes. Secondly, the resurgence of the Liberal Party has also had an effect. Its surprise win against the Conservatives in the April 2025 general election, who just months earlier had been expected to score a landslide victory, will almost certainly feed into the Albertan sense of political marginalisation. Indeed, with opinion polls showing that support for secession would grow if the Liberals did in fact win a third term, Smith has already issued a thinly veiled warning to the new Canadian Prime Minister, Mark Carney. In a message to the new leader, she noted that while Albertans are proud Canadians, they wouldn't tolerate threats to their industries, hinting at an independence vote if the new government pursued what she called hostile acts. So, could Alberta really try to break away? As things stand, it certainly can't be discounted. Unlike most other countries where secession is constitutionally prohibited, thanks to the Clarity Act, Canada has a clearly defined route for separation. In this regard, we may well see an independence referendum. The question is whether this succeeds, and what would it lead to? At this stage, and despite all the recent developments, a vote for independence appears unlikely. Full-scale separatism still remains a minority position. Then again, much could yet rest on the relationship between the provincial and federal governments. If tensions continue to rise and Ottawa is seen to be working against Albertan interests, support for independence may increase. In this sense, Albertan secession might not be as far-fetched as it seems, although it should also be noted that this is unlikely to be a swift process, if it does in fact ever happen. As for annexation by the United States, this seems even less likely. While Trump's talk of Canadian annexation has been well received by some Albertans, it still seems a fringe viewpoint. More to the point, as the negative effects of Trump's economic policies take hold, support for this option may flow away entirely. Instead, the greater threat is that if Alberta were in fact to break away, others within Canada would follow. Polling suggests that support for independence is also relatively high in neighbouring Saskatchewan. And if those two broke away, Manitoba and British Columbia, which also have their own sovereigntist movements, may also start to view separation more favourably. And looming over all this is, of course, Quebec. If others leave, it may also begin a new push to break away. And it's for all these reasons that the debate currently taking place in Alberta may yet have far more significant implications for the future of Canada than any of Trump's seemingly hollow threats to annex the country. I hope you found that useful. If so, here are some more videos that you might find interesting. Thanks so much for watching, and see you in the next video.